Ready when you are.
Gooseberries, penalties, and fondled keys. All on this domestic instalment of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that has no idea what normal blokes do, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. On tonight's programme, the 11th Doctor's fresh out of the shower and determined to keep his twirling erection hidden away in his bedroom. Meanwhile, James Corden can't see the point of London. No need to rush back from LA on our account. We destroy our friendship completely and take in the lodger. Evening, John.
Hello, how's it going?
All right, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're back.
We are.
Hello, listeners. Hello, viewers.
Hi.
All out there in YouTube land.
Yep, there they are. Well, it's two listeners, one viewer, isn't it?
Gather the family round.
That itself sounds like the kind of video that's found on the darker end of the web.
Absolutely. Don't search for that. We don't know what's going to come up. We can't be held responsible for what happens to your search history. No. Anyway, here we are. I'll explain later. Ready to talk about more Doctor Who. As per, that's all we really talk about.
As per tweet.
Well,
Sorry. Okay, let's.
Have you done that joke before? Or have I blocked it out?
No. I think that's one first and only time that joke is probably
perfect. What an airing. Anyway, tonight we are talking about the Lodger, Matt Smith episode from the tail end of Matt Smith's
Roger the Lodger, the sod.
Series.
Sorry.
John, give us the stats.
Yes. So
when did this happen?
So this is a cool 14 years ago now. So
Bloody
this
hell.
was broadcast, I know, on the 12th of June 2010, and it's 11th Doctor story. So that's of course
Matthew Smith,
the key companion, Karen Gillan. No Arthur Darvill on the on the roster.
And Karen Gillan. Well, this is I had to. Yeah, I had a little moment of memory. So Rory's dead at this point, isn't he? And Amy's forgotten about him, which sort of explains the business at the end with the wedding ring.
Exactly. And then, so this is the 11th episode. It's followed by the Pandorica opens. So it's really, it's basically the penultimate bit of fun before you get to the kind of denouement of the season.
What happens in it?
Well, I was going to go through some of the personnel first.
Oh, okay.
Just because... just to place it in its context, obviously that means that Stephen Moffat is show running, and you've got Murray Gold on the old Tinkling the Ivories. Tinkling the Ivories. No, it's directed by Catherine Morshed. I think I'm saying that correctly. Who I don't know much about, but she apparently, according to Wikipedia, directed Emmerdale Farm, Ashes to Ashes, and also directed Amy's Choice.
Ah, right, yes.
So, decent chops. We quite liked Amy's Choice.
Yeah, I think we did.
Or felt there was more in that.
If only we'd recorded our opinions somewhere for future reference.
Indeed. So, yeah, and this episode, The Lodger, I think classified fairly widely as a kind of a broad comedy, a broad romantic comedy of an episode.
I think he's moderately well liked as well.
Well, we'll come to that.
Okay.
We'll see how well liked it is in this room. But yeah, I think so. It was written by Gareth Roberts, who based the script on his own 2006 Doctor Who magazine comic strip of the same name.
Yes,
and
which sees, I think, the 10th Doctor cohabiting with Mickey for a bit while Rose is off doing something else. That's
right. Okay. So that sort of covers that, and of course, I was reading a little bit about the episode, sort of prior to recording this, and it does seem that it's quite a loose adaptation of that.
Yes, apparently Roberts sort of ended up. It was commissioned as an adaptation of the comic strip, but ended up. I mean, I've not read the comic strip, but by all accounts,
Can I
it's a bit
stop
of a
you?
rewrite from scratch.
Neither have I.
You surprised me.
I barely managed to watch the
Yeah.
Lodger. So the idea of reading any other ancillary material would have been quite beyond me. But,
Absolutely.
especially because we are recording this on the 6th of November, so the US presidential election result has just dropped.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
This will be old news by the time you listen to this.
Yes, indeed. But at time of recording...
It's still a very live future worry.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, what happens in the Lodger, John?
Well, so the TARDIS momentarily dematerializes, and the Doctor gets chucked out of it, and then or materializes, and then it dematerializes, and then the Doctor's sort of on his own, and Amy's left in the Amy Pond, played by Karen Gillan, is left in the TARDIS and sort of trying desperately to rematerialize. And the Doctor has to figure out why the TARDIS can't land, and finds that there's some sort of temporal anomaly going on the first floor of a Victorian semi-detached house.
Yep.
And so he becomes a lodger in that house to try and discern what's going on. Not, it has to be said, the quickest of investigations.
No.
Because he finds a lot of time to engage with his flatmate.
Yes.
Who's played by James Corden.
It's called, was it Craig?
Yeah. And he is very much in love with Sophie.
Yep.
Yeah. Who is played by Daisy Haggard, and we'll come on to their performances later.
Yeah.
But it's really about that relationship.
Sort of the Doctor effectively acting as matchmaker for these two.
It's Emma for
friends
these
who can't get it together.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of matchmaking for those two. And helping them see a little bit more of themselves and give them some life lessons along the way.
Yeah.
But it's really much more about that than it is about the kind of sci-fi MacGuffin, I suppose.
Yes.
Although, we'll come to that, I guess.
It's a very good summary.
I thank you very much. In terms of style, obviously, it is very much played as a romantic comedy.
It's a rom-com, yeah.
It's totally rom-com, and pretty broad. And Matt Smith leans into that. I'll put my cards on the table. I think his performance in this is very good. He's very good with that broad humour. He manages to go from the broad humour to observations about people's lives. He can handle those kind of handbrake turns quite well as an actor. But does it really cohere into anything more than the sum of its parts? Or indeed, does it cohere into something that's rather less than the sum of its parts, even if some of those parts, like a curate's egg, good in parts. Is it the curate's egg, or is it a slap up omelette?
Well, omelettes figuring obviously
indeed
prominently in this story.
With a squeeze of mayonnaise, oddly, which I've never tried. But I've never tried it, but I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
James Corden.
Be a nice bit of bonus content, wouldn't it?
He leans back and says, his character leans back and says, "Blimey, that was amazing."
Yeah.
So we're led to believe the Doctor is very good at many different things. Again, we'll come to that. But anyway, broadly speaking, given that it was a broad comedy and a rom-com at that, you watched this for 45 minutes. You sat back, and what did you think of it?
Yeah, you're looking for a snap reaction there. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, and I guess the gentleman who berated us for our woke politics on the Apple Podcast review may want to fast forward through the next few minutes. But look, this is the first time.
Look away now.
Look away now. If you don't want to hear more woke politics, look away now. Look, this is our first encounter with writer Gareth Roberts, who has a long history with the show and a sort of interesting trajectory that I think may or may not add interesting context to the episode. I'm not sure. Let's see. I mean, he emerges as part of the sort of pantheon of new adventures writers, or sort of Virgin Books writers in the 90s, writes a number of books that are extremely well received. And I think what people really liked about those books was that at a point where, like, the new adventures were really pursuing this sort of quite sort of radical literary sci-fi kind of quite experimental approach, or certainly quite radical within the frame of Doctor Who. He was, all about writing a nuts and bolts trad Doctor Who story. And when he started writing for the Missing Adventures, I think became sort of very broadly well loved for how well he captured the sort of spirit and voice of the Graham Williams era. So like he writes a couple of books for the Fourth Doctor and the Second Romana. He goes on to have a TV career. He writes for Emmerdale. He writes for Brookside. He writes for a couple of sitcoms. He writes for the Channel 5 sketch show Swinging, which, little fact you might not know, I'm actually in. Because I was a runner on it and have a variety of background roles, including man holding sink plunger pretending to be Dalek. So,
did you get a line? Did you get your equity card?
I didn't get a line.
Damn.
There is a story about whether I got a line on that series, which I will save for another time. So obviously I'll explain later.
I don't think we're going to come back to it. It's probably time for the story now.
I'll say, do you know what? Let's do the story after the clip.
All right. If that doesn't keep them listening, I don't know what will.
Stand by for the story. If we had a paywall, we'd put it behind there. But anyway, he is writing for television, and he writes for the show in series 3 and 4 under Russell T Davies. He does a couple of celeb historicals, so the Shakespeare episode, the Agatha Christie episode. He co-writes Planet of the Dead, and then under Stephen Moffat, he writes, I would actually say, 3 very similar scripts that are about, essentially the Doctor hanging out and doing stuff, sort of trying to lead a normal life on Earth for various reasons. Alongside that, he is very active on the website now known as x.com, formerly known as Twitter, where he takes... And look, I don't know if this is a trajectory that increased, but he broadcasts, that he is a conservative, who's voted Tory several times, and that becomes a more prominent part of his social media output. This gets to the point where he posts a tweet that is quite mocking of trans people. And this leads to a bit of a dust-up where he is, a contribution of his is removed from an upcoming collection of Doctor Who short stories because allegedly some of the other authors involved expressed discomfort at being involved in the same collection as him.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out, I think, at this point that the particular social media posts in question that he did at that time were not only abusive, but directed at certain individuals.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's a proper double whammy there.
It's a proper double whammy. It's pretty horrific. And at this point, he then doubles down in a lengthy post on where else? Medium, the home of lengthy libertarian posting, where he lays
Other
out...
political persuasions are available on Medium, I believe. But
yeah, yet to see too many. Well, basically, he sort of doubles down on his view that he doesn't believe in the notion of gender identity, and has then gone on to author a book about how he believes that the push for trans rights is a stealth attempt to roll back gains in
he describes it as the new homophobia.
He describes it as new homophobia, exactly. Yeah. It's sort of echoing the J.K. Rowling position that, trans rights are an attack on women's rights. He believes trans rights are an attack on gay rights.
Well, it's nice to have some variety in those views.
Absolutely, yeah. Pick your flavour of transphobe. But he, this has sort of, clearly brought an end to his involvement with Doctor Who. Like all good cancellations, he's done pretty well out of it in that he now has regular columns in The Spectator and Spiked.
Yay!
He's really covering the full spectrum of
arsehole publications.
British libertarian arsehole publications.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, I've gone long on that, but
what I will say,
and to say that I'll explain later, stands in full solidarity with the trans community.
Correct.
Fuck transphobia. He, his politics and worldview suck. I'm quite happy to say that.
As do the politics and worldview of many of the contributors to Doctor Who over the 60-odd years of its existence. I think the question is, I suppose, we're going to review this.
Yes.
Do his politics bear at all on what arrives on screen?
Yeah.
I broadly would say no.
I would agree with that. And so that's the thing. I think going into it, and I've not seen this since it went out and since, the timeline, which, apologies for length, but, I wanted to get the details right.
Yeah.
Before all of that sort of played out. And I was interested if there was, and slightly worried about the fact also, like, is this just going to be a game of whack-a-mole where you sort of read the runes and try and find, where this worldview pervades into the story?
But I think this is probably where our our eye-rolly, they're too woke people can probably rejoin the room because we're not such arseholes that we will go looking for that where it's not there. And the thing is, if it is there, then I want to fucking interrogate it.
I don't think.
But
I mean, this is Doctor Who written by a right winger, and I find quite an unpleasant anti-woke right winger at that.
Quite.
I wouldn't describe this as right wing Doctor Who.
No.
I think that
in fact, there are progressives who've written more accidentally right-wing Doctor Who.
Absolutely. And looking at our schedule, I think we're going to be talking about some of those in the
very near future.
In the very near future. But yeah, I think, all of his contributions to TV Doctor Who. I haven't seen all of his contributions to the Sarah Jane Adventures, so I can't.
You've not watched his Emmerdale
for the Rachel. No,
back catalogue.
Like his TV contributions, I think are essentially froth, and it's like it's either the celeb historical or the comedy about the Doctor trying to act.
Have we not reviewed The Unicorn and the Wasp?
No, this is our first.
Oh, okay.
This is our first. So we're not. Because
I remember
future instalments can refer you back to this.
Because that's quite.
Not going to hear this multiple times.
That's quite worrying because I recently watched The Unicorn and the Wasp. So I must have done that. I must have done
for
that
pleasure.
For fun. I don't watch Doctor Who for fun anymore. No, not now. We got. I'll explain later.
So I don't think this is right-wing Doctor Who, and what I'm not going to do is use that lens to analyse this episode.
Well, I don't think there's any need to because, as I say, I just don't think the politics pertain, and we're going to talk about the show, therefore, on the basis of what has arrived on the screen.
What I will say is that I think this episode sucks on purely its own terms.
Well, yes.
I found this, and actually, I have to say,
this a very tough watch.
I found this a profoundly irritating watch. It's I remember thinking quite fondly of it. I think I actually quite liked it first time I saw it, but like I say, I've not seen it in 14 years. I think that it's. First of all, I find just the sound of it incredibly irritating. You've got Murray Gold at his most whimsical.
Yeah.
Which is...
Not a place...
It's not something I want to put in my ears, put it that way. This is also at the... this was the last episode to be shot in Matt Smith's first season, and this is really where they start writing to the performance.
Yeah.
So, I think Matt Smith's performance is pretty excellent in the first part of the series when he is trying to find a read on a slightly more generically written Doctor, whereas here they're writing up the sort of the gabble, the sort of the slightly manic, wacky mannerisms, which I don't think serve his performance well, and I think that really escalates over the coming series.
Yeah, I think actually. I think his comic chops are quite interesting. I think he's quite an engaging comic performer, and he doesn't really get many opportunities to do that these days in the choice of work that he's made. But I think he's quite a good broad comic performer. I would agree with you that when he starts getting the sort of am I? No, am I? Oh no, I'm not. Which is a bit of, by the way, that's a bit of a we're looking at some Jodie Whittaker era Doctor Who next week, and I suspect this will be a running thing. That sort of gabble of "Am I? No, I'm not." Oh, is that who I am now? Oh, no, which seems to be a bit of a trope within the whole of the New Who run.
Absolutely,
and by the way, with Tennant as well, right? It's that's certainly a thing. But yeah, I agree. When it goes into that, it really does become very eye rolly. However, I think some of the stuff like just the goofing around, like dancing on the pitch, or like there are a couple of moments where he's just an engaging, pleasant watch.
Yeah.
But I would agree with you that the kind of aggregate of all of this just makes him, like you say, they're writing to the performance, or at least that's how it feels, and it's been dialed up to 11 in a way that makes it quite tiresome.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally it's just the tone of it, and particularly like the phone calls with Amy, where there's also a lot of other noise and music going on, and Karen Gillan sort of at her shoutiest.
Yeah. Was she in a play at the time or something?
Those scenes and those phone call scenes gone for ages.
Yeah,
I mean,
very
very long.
It genuinely feels like there's a production problem.
Yeah.
Like, when you look at some of the other episodes that are Doctor Light or Companion Light in other series around this time, they're usually rather more artful about the sparing nature of the use of one or more of the characters. This doesn't feel artful. This is like, we've got Karen Gillan for an afternoon, we're going to shoot some telephone scenes.
And if you consider how, I mean, we did Blink a few weeks ago, where obviously that is designed to keep, it's designed to keep both of the regulars in the background. But even then, it's really thoughtful about how it's sort of doing a minimal amount of shooting, but getting maximum sort of juice out of it. Whereas here, it's a loud, noisy phone call.
And like you say, a couple of those scenes really, really go on a while.
Really long.
Yeah.
The pacing is a bit all over the shop. So I just found as an aesthetic experience, I mean, it looks good. I think the direction's pretty good. It looks nice.
Oh, it snaps along. Yeah, it's well edited as well. And I don't know who the editor is.
Yeah, it's well cut as well. But yeah, so I think I find I just find the experience of it quite grating. I also think, and you sort of rightly said that the alien invasion plot is a MacGuffin for it to be about the rom-com, and it's like, and I don't mind that kind of bait and switch. I think there are plenty of episodes of Doctor Who that hand wave one aspect of the plot because they're going like, well, this is what we're focusing on. But I find the rom-com element of it so thin and by the numbers, and with there's so little sort of colour to it. It's very much like, and this is the thing. I mean, I'm sure we'll spend a lot more time talking about James Corden in particular, who obviously is the guest turn in this. Whether or not you like him or dislike him, and James Corden is quite polarizing.
Hang on, no. Whether you dislike him or loathe him,
if that's the spectrum, I think he does have some, and this is sort of relatively recently after Gavin and Stacey. I think he has some comic chops as a comic actor.
I think you're underselling it. His personality aside, he is a very talented.
He's a good comic actor.
He's a very good. Now we can talk about whether that really comes across here, but I saw him in One Man Two Governors on stage, and he was mesmerizing. Gavin and Stacey is despite everything an incredible juggernaut.
I like it,
and it's a great show, and it's brilliantly written, and of course he writes that, co-writes that as well.
I would
say his pedigree is there, and what I think is quite striking is how little, knowing that he has that ability, there's really nothing here.
No. To be honest, I think with the rom-com plot, the rom-com aspect
it's also peculiar.
Of it,
it's also peculiar. Just sorry, from Gareth Roberts' perspective as the writer, I don't know if he knew who was going to be cast when he wrote it. But it's very peculiar to, you've got Gavin and Stacey. Well, in Gavin and Stacey, it's called Gavin and Stacey, and they're almost the least important or interesting characters in it, right?
Yeah.
It's really about Smithy, played by Corden, and Nessa, who's played by Ruth Jones.
The
right?
two writers.
And so, Gavin and Stacey are actually the straight man, woman. They're the
To this extended cast of oddballs that you kind
Precisely.
of have, yes, in it.
And what you've done, what the program has done here, what the execs have done, what the casting director have done, they've taken someone with profound comic acting chops as the kind of the funny man,
Yeah,
cast him as the straight man,
yeah,
and I find that makes it quite a frustrating watch, because if I'm going to endure 45 minutes of James Corden, at least wind him up
yeah.
to be the thing that he's best at,
That
which
he's really
is
good at.
nation's funny man, as
Absolutely.
opposed to straight man to the Doctor being all wacky.
Yeah.
So just from a kind of nuts and bolts sort of comedy architecture point of view, it's a peculiar
The emphasis
setup.
is in all the wrong place. Yeah. I mean, I would say that, to be honest, like, also, we should talk about Daisy Haggard as well, who's a brilliant comic actress and has been in a ton of really good things. I mean, the sitcom that she did, or the comedy drama that she did a couple of years ago, where she was a woman who's just come out of prison, sort of trying to get her life back together.
Yes, the name of which also...
name which escapes both of us, but it was really good. So go and Google that.
Yes, I will.
I mean, Daisy Haggard and James Corden are putting in a real shift here, I think.
Back to life.
Back to life, there you go. I think they're both putting in a real shift here, and where there is any charm to the rom-com aspect, it is all in the performances and absolutely nothing on the page.
I would agree.
To the point where, like, they occasionally sort of come close to making it work. But the thing is they're both incredibly sort of nothing characters. I mean, the point of it is that it's set in Colchester, right? So it's sort of that sort of suburban, Craig is very skeptical about it. He says, I don't see what the point of London is. The idea is obviously that they're two people who are sort of trapped in this milieu. But there's so little colour to it. And if you think how that would be portrayed in something like Gavin and Stacey, or in, and my mileage varies when Davis does this, but in a Russell T Davies script, you'd see a little bit of colour around, that situation, that clearly the point is that they are both trapped in and comforted by and sort of longing to escape from.
Yeah, and there's a couple of examples. And again, it's a little difficult to pass whether this is... I don't know to what extent Moffat polished the episode or whatever, but there's an attempt to do some RTD-esque stuff, in terms of leaving breadcrumbs about the characters, as if those little sketched out details that give you the sense of perspective into the character, that it's a real 3D character that Russell T Davies is much more talented at than anything that's shown here.
And let's be honest, Corden is much more talented at when it comes
absolutely.
to writing.
Oh,
And
completely. But like there are so there are parts where I think Sophie says there's a discussion about her third best friend and her fourth best friend, and it's this attempt to try to sketch out that little sort of cloud in the background that gives you a sense of depth in a picture, to use that as a kind of metaphor, and but it doesn't quite land. It's not quite enough. It's not sketched in sufficient detail to give you that sense. And what Russell T Davies is so good, he's so good at making a very tiny but very astute observation and then pulling back from it immediately.
Yeah.
As if to say, well, we could have talked about that for 10 minutes, but we don't have the time.
Absolutely.
Whereas this whole third best friend thing, it felt like it was too obviously a bit.
Yeah.
And it just didn't work really very well.
But you sort of feel as well that there could have been a world in which you would put them in, like that sort of flat share milieu. Because the thing is, it's like, who are these people? Like, he's not exactly a schlub because he's living in quite a nice, I mean, obviously converted into flats, but quite a nice terrace house in Colchester. But he's obviously, he's obviously meant to be a bit of a loser. And you just feel like it could have almost had that kind of almost Shaun of the Dead flavour about it, where, that, which obviously... that, I think that's an incredibly funny film, but that is absolutely situating, what happens when the sci-fi world intrudes on this world of sort of suburban, domestic, going nowhere kind of vibes. And I just think there's nothing to locate these people beyond the performances. I think also it succumbs so quickly to so many rom-com cliches, like Sophie, she closes the door, just turning around and collapsing against the door. There was another one I wrote down. The pained look after breaking eye contact and saying goodnight and all of those kind of things. It's like it's so by the numbers, but as I say, you've got no sense of who these people are. And that's the thing that this episode is asking you to care about. If you then look around, and I find the Doctor very grating in this. And then the alien invasion plot, literally turns out to be yet another AI gone rogue that thinks it's doing the right. Well, there's obviously a slightly more malevolent edge to it. But it's another AI gone rogue working through a process logically but destructively.
But also, like, it doesn't pass the smell test of something that would actually. If we're going to spend 45 minutes scrutinizing the episode, then I'll go there. But like, it's another AI gone wrong, or like a misfiring computer. But someone sat down and wrote a computer program. Right? In the event of a crash, we will kill the inhabitants of a planet one by one to see if their brain is compatible with getting this back in the sky, regardless of whether anyone is around to pilot the ship or not. If you think about it...
But then it crashes by someone who... Is it that they do or don't
They don't want to leave, which causes the computer to go, oh my God, I don't even understand this.
It's a stupid contrivance of an ending, which is obviously designed, in terms of the engineering terms, to get them to admit, Craig and Sophie to admit their love for each other, and, love conquers all. But it's so dumb and it's so unearned. And it's like... again, it is. If there's anything there, it's all in the performances.
I tell you what,
and this is a good guest cast.
Where the characterization is perfect, where you believe in their characters, it can paper over a lot of plot contrivance bullshit, right? But if you haven't earned it, as you just said, then what you end up in is a situation where you're watching that great emotional climax, and what you're thinking is, nobody would write an AI like that.
Yeah.
What the hell is that?
Well, that's the thing. It's
problem.
like the hand wave, the sort of, oh no, we're looking at this over here. Don't worry about that. Is like, what's over here is so relatively uninteresting. Yeah, it's like you do wander and go, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make a lick of sense.
I would agree with you that James Corden and Daisy Haggard are, what charm there is largely to do with their performance. But it just, I know it's wanting to do Route One rom-com, but it's very, very Route One, like you said, the kind of closing the door and then collapsing behind it. Oh God, it's very difficult to believe that these people who are so close, like it doesn't pass the smell test that they haven't talked about this.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
It's never come up.
It doesn't really work, because they're too close to each other for that to have never been discussed.
I will say that the one episode I like, and I don't, occasionally this happens on this podcast when I say there's something that I slightly like and you absolutely demolish it and make it sound like I've praised it to the heights. But it's like, so let's not wander into that.
Oh, go on.
The one aspect of it that, other than the performances, and maybe actually it is down to the performances that slightly works, is the scene where it's the three of them sitting in the living room of an evening where the Doctor's crashed their, was it Pizza Booze Telly evening?
Oh, yeah.
And he does that thing where he sort of demolishes her worldview to force her, like the Doctor demolishes Sophie's worldview a little bit, or like pretends to neg her a bit in order to get her to sort of express a bit of self-confidence. And I think Matt Smith's delivery on when he just sort of ends that by going like, it's a big old world, Sophie, you've got to work out what's keeping you here. It's like that actually feels like quite a nice,
that's the best part of the episode for sure. I completely agree. But also,
and all three of the cast, Matt Smith's very good in that too.
But I think it's largely because it's a bit you see it coming, but Matt Smith delivers it so charmingly. I mean, the kind of the little grit, the little kind of the little kind of bashful grin he gives when she's figured out that he's not being serious.
Yeah.
And something that Matt Smith has always been very good at, actually, particularly it has to be said in the earlier part of season 5, is that sense of giving a lot older than he really is.
Absolutely, yeah. He's a guy who's been around the block.
You got to figure out, what's keeping you here. He manages to slip into that overcoat of being massively older than Matt Smith was at the time. So I would agree. I think that's far and away the best part of it. But then again, coming back to the kind of architecture and engineering of it, it's a bit unfortunate that then we have to watch another 15 minutes of the program and endure an emotional climax that doesn't really work.
Yeah. I would also say, I mean, it's like in terms of it setting up its premise as to what the Doctor is all about in this, because the Doctor basically says, I'm a normal bloke. What do normal blokes do? And the whole thing of the episode is all about, what do normal blokes do, and is the Doctor good at doing those things? And yes, obviously there's a comedic twist that actually he is good at these things. But it would seem, and to be very clear, I'm not making any sort of reach into any ideas about gender identity that Gareth Roberts may or may not have had fully developed at the time of writing this. But it does seem to sort of alight on the idea that, like, what normal blokes do is go to the football and work in a call centre, which is not an interesting read on masculinity at all, I think. That's basically where the story is alighting of, like... Yeah. It feels very Route One, I think. It's like, if you wanted to do a story where, like, oh, is he good at football? And, there is also perhaps an argument. So obviously Matt Smith was very nearly going to be a professional footballer. Yes. And so it's an opportunity for him to do that. Obviously, this went out as well around the time of the World Cup in...
South Africa,
2010. So
get out your vuvuzelas.
Oh, God. So there's a certain sort of... it might just be the case that was one of my... this is going out during the football. Matt Smith's good at football. Let's put a football scene.
Now that we are on the YouTube, I have to say that my favourite ever YouTube bit of business was the button during the 2010 World Cup where you could put the vuvuzela sound over whatever video you were watching. So you could be watching...
Put it over this one.
Delia Smith make like a terrine or something, and go cacophonous vuvuzela noise over the top. That was. But you see there again, that little bit there was far funnier than anything that happened in this episode.
Well, and this is the other thing. It's not very funny. It's like
no, and comedy that's throwing the shapes to be comedy and is trying to be funny and isn't. It's
got the sort of the rhythm and the cadence of it, but there's no actual jokes in here, and no one actually does anything that's funny. I mean, Matt Smith runs out the shower waving a toothbrush around because he thinks it's a sonic screwdriver or something. I mean, that's the sort of comedic heights that we're sort of reaching. Yeah. So it's a bit of a bust for me, to be honest.
It's very flat.
It's very flat. I sort of want to...
as I recall, in the next season, or maybe it's season 7, I don't remember, but we get to revisit these characters.
There's a sequel, yeah. Absolutely, with the Cybermen.
Right.
And
I've memory hold that, other than knowing that James Corden does another episode, basically.
He does, yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much more to say about it, really. And I think it's like, I know I went long on the first part of this in sort of setting out the Gareth Roberts timeline, but I sort of wanted to be clear that, whilst I really disdain his politics, that does not underpin my reason for disliking this. It did, and this is something to maybe sort of circle back around on and just think about for a bit, is like, it's also the case that Gareth Roberts is probably not, almost certainly not, the first right-winger to write for Doctor Who. And
Terrance Dicks, I mean, goodness me.
Well, so this is the thing, and it's like, it did get me thinking about, so I mean, so Gareth Roberts writes the Froth episodes, right? He doesn't write any episodes that, I mean, I think you'd have to do a serious reach in order to feel that any of his work is like, an excoriation of the excesses of the woke left or anything like that. That doesn't enter the frame of his work. But it did got me thinking about sort of where can conservatism usefully or productively enter the frame of Doctor Who. And Terrance Dicks was sort of the sort of example I came back to. So, I mean, Terrance Dicks, he didn't talk extensively about his politics in that, he wasn't on social media offering sort of daily commentary on the events of the day. Maybe if he was, we would have a slightly different, view of him as a person. I don't know. But, he's gone on record on a number of Doctor Who DVD extras talking about, how he felt that the British Empire was a force for good in the world and that many of the colonies, or many of the former colonies, would have been better off if Britain had stayed. And we always end up circling back to the Pertwee era and how good we think it is. But I think it's like that conservative voice has a useful role to play in those stories where potentially, the sort of the liberal pieties and assumptions of some of the other writers can at least be sort of usefully challenged or complicated. It's like Doctor Who trends towards liberal ideas, but sometimes you need that conservative critique of those ideas to show that the route there can be hard or complicated.
I agree completely. He says, while obviously storing up a butt.
Yeah.
I do agree completely. But what I think makes things quite challenging is that, and I say this obviously personally from a liberal left perspective, liberal in the sense that I believe in pluralism, not liberal in the sense of kind of being a kind of gutless centrist, but liberal. But from a liberal left perspective, the tendency that I find most useful within conservatism is the respect for and the belief in institutions.
Yeah.
And that and a reasonable sort of logical, almost heuristic that, well,
you better be bringing this back round to Doctor Who.
I know I am. if something has been done for a very long time like this, there probably should be a very good and compelling argument to change it.
Yeah.
And conservatism that kind of consolidates, when there has been a period of radical change, a period of conservatism that consolidates that change and establishes it as the new institution, the new reality, which then... And I suppose the problem these days is that conservatives are not like that anymore.
No.
Like the Conservative Party in the UK, for example, of Kemi Badenoch and Brexit and Liz Truss is not the Conservative Party of Ken Clarke, Michael Heseltine, John Major, right? Gillian Shepherd. It's a different and sort of tear it up, very, very radical form of conservatism. And so I suppose the kind of when it comes to Doctor Who, what I find most most useful about the conservative voice in the Pertwee era, which I've described at nauseating length over the last 10 years as kind of almost a physical representation of the post-war consensus, Butzkellism writ large. That it's about the conservative aspect is the belief in institutions, the belief that authority has a role to play, that clubbing together in the form of institutions rather than, I don't know, some sort of anarchic commune has some value.
Yeah.
Might be challenged by other radical voices, but that's a point of view which is defensible. And I find that I think it's going to be a lot more challenging for conservative voices to plausibly write Doctor Who in this era if their view is we should exclude these people. Those people over there shouldn't be part of our club.
Yeah.
So it just makes it very more challenging because that's very, very essentially, even all the way back to 1963, not what Doctor Who is about.
Absolutely not. And I think, to preview coming attractions, we're going to be talking pretty soon about what happens when right-wing ideas, intentionally or unintentionally, sort of make a home in Doctor Who. It's a very odd flavour. I think
contemporary right-wing ideas as well. I think
absolutely.
I mean, look,
I think Doctor Who, is fundamentally, he's a liberal bohemian character. It is a liberal show that exists to, provide, the character exists to champion the marginalised, against the larger forces that may look to crush, to snuff those voices out. I
suppose you could write a Doctor Who episode where the forces of the deep state are stopping somebody from, I don't know, cutting taxes.
But that person would also probably be going around being horrible to other people. So
yes, and probably be the real person in charge.
Yeah.
So, which is usually how it is these days.
So anyway, I just thought it was worth sort of putting a button on that to say it's like, it's not even, as an avowed leftist, it's not even, I consider Doctor Who to be a pretty liberal show. It's like, it's not even saying that, no right-wingers in my Doctor Who, please. All of which is to say that I think Gareth Roberts sucks. I think the Lodger sucks, but for entirely different reasons.
Now, live with the ins and the outs and the do's and the don'ts of Texas real estate, this is Your Real Estate Advisor. Brought to you by Bankers Financial Group.
Welcome to the show. I'm Chet Wilkie, your real estate advisor. Most people should be aware of the dangers of black mold, but it's been due to health concerns or insurance companies refusing to write coverage because of it. Black mold has been in the news a lot lately. Here's WFAA TV's Shelley Koffler with more.
So I had a bit of business to discuss with you here, possibly about
Can I just say
guest turns in Doctor Who.
Before we kick off on the extra bit, right?
Yeah.
I'm astonished that we had that much to say about the Lodger, because one of the things I bump against in our new format of doing one story per show is that it puts a lot of pressure on us to find things to say. And I was watching this desperately thinking, I don't think I've got anything to say about this, but we managed it, and hopefully we've held on to at least one of the two listeners to this point in the show. But if you have held on, and before we get to your bit of the week, you're going to tell your story.
I thought I'll save the bit of the. I was just going to have a chat about guest turns in Doctor Who, but that's a sort of evergreen topic that we can
keeping
save
them
for
hanging
another
on.
time. There is a Doctor Who connection, so we're going to wind back to Swinging. 2005, the raunchy Channel 5 sketch show. Mm-hmm. There's actually
Channel 5 was all nudity back in those days,
absolutely.
wasn't it?
Was
Chegwin with his
films,
chap
football,
out.
and fucking was the original promise by the. I forget.
That was up on a billboard.
Forget the name of the guy.
It
now.
wasn't up on a billboard, but
no,
yes.
but I mean,
that was very much the stated agenda.
It was very much the stated agenda. So yeah, actually the Doctor Who lore runs deep with Swinging. So you got Gareth Roberts. There are a couple of other Doctor Who book authors who write for it. Rebecca Levine, who she might have been the editor of the New Adventures.
No relation, I'm presuming.
Jonathan Morris writes for it as well, who's written a bunch of Doctor Who novels and Big Finish. In the cast, you've got Jo Joyner, aka Linda with a Y.
Right.
So yeah, there is a Doctor Who themed sketch in it where like a character decides that he's going to make him and his girlfriend have finally decided to do a sex tape together, but it's very 2005 as a topic. But the guy is a Doctor Who fan, has decided to make a Doctor Who themed sex tape. And I am in the final scene where there's a guy brought in to hold a sink plunger pretending to be a Dalek for good measure. But elsewhere in the series...
Sorry. So you were holding a sink plunger.
This isn't on... I did look for it on YouTube the other day. I'm holding a sink plunger and wearing some tin foil, and it's clear that I'm in there as a low-rent Dalek that this guy's roped in for his Doctor Who-themed sex tape.
Yeah.
If I can find it, I'll put it up somewhere.
What's the... Are you the punchline?
No.
Because you are in this podcast.
No. But for once, I'm not.
Right.
But anyway, elsewhere in the series, there is a... So I was about 21 when this was
God, that dates it, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes, that was a long time ago. Maybe 22. But there was a role for a teenage lad in one of the recurring sketches about about an art teacher who's consistently trying to crack on to one of the sixth formers. So again, 2005, folks. But yeah, that was a speaking role, and the producer of the show asked to save money if I would be interested in doing that role. And I was like, well, I'm not an actor. I don't really feel confident doing this. I passed up on the opportunity. Who did they get in? Andrew Garfield. And that sketch is on YouTube. Someone's ripped all of those. So, and the Doctor Who connection there. Obviously, the following year he's in the Daleks in Manhattan two-parter.
Yeah.
But then, rather more prominently, is like Spider-Man and in The Social Network. So we were talking. I mean, when we were talking about Blink the other week, we were talking about sliding doors moments. I feel like my sliding doors moment is there is a world in which I'd said yes to that, and I'm now a major Hollywood turn. Whereas instead, I said no. And I'm sitting here talking to you about Doctor Who on YouTube.
Talk about the multiverse.
100%.
Because there's that. Yeah, wow. That's yeah. Gosh, that. I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that may not have happened if you. But you know, you do you. It's a nice thought, isn't it? Maybe we can mock up a picture of you in spandex.
This is possibly the most indulgent episode we've ever noticed. But there you go.
Well, it's so good that it's in our comeback
Yes.
run.
Do you want to discuss guest turns in Doctor Who?
I
or do you want to
do.
save that for another
Yeah,
time?
yeah.
All right. So the guest turn, I think, is something that we associate with very much the John Nathan. It becomes a thing in the John Nathan Turner era of the show, and then pretty much for the entirety of the new series run, it's kind of part and parcel. John, I mean, one of the regular sort of, and obviously the connection here is obviously we're talking about James Corden here, who's, you know, the big star at this point. I mean, probably an even bigger star now, but like is a big name guest star in this episode. One of the regular...
Well, he was a much bigger star at the time. He was a much bigger star than Matt Smith, say.
Absolutely.
At the time.
Yeah. One of the regular sort of barbs against John Nathan Turner by fans at the time was his sort of proclivity for stunt casting, as if, you know, and I think one could argue that it was relatively new in the context of Doctor Who.
I mean, City of Death has that John Cleese cameo, but I mean, when you say...
That's a real outlier, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But this is also the thing of, like, I'm sort of interested in, well, which Doctor Who guest turns you've particularly enjoyed.
I mean, that one.
Or also whether there's any...
I know it's a blink and you sort of blink and you miss it, but it's terribly funny. So, yeah, I'd say John Cleese probably wins that.
Do you know what? I'd completely forgotten about Cleese in City of Death, because this is also to my point that I think...
Because it's beautiful writing and a fantastic performance, even though it's just a tiny little moment.
A lot of the Nathan Turner guest appearances do very much have that era of like names from yesteryear.
Yeah.
I think it was, I'm going to attribute this view to a friend of the show and an occasional Big Finish scribe, James Kettle, who said that, you know, where are all the alternative comedians in like 80s Doctor Who? I mean, I think the nearest you get, obviously you got Alexei Sale in Revelation of the Daleks, and, you know, Hale and Pace are in Survival. But a lot of the guest stars that era are very much that sort of Rodney Bewes, Beryl Reid, you know, they're sort of much loved figures of an earlier era in a way. Whereas the agenda with the sort of modern series version of the show is very, like, I mean, pretty much from, what was the first big one? Peter Kay, I think, probably in series 2. I mean, there's a lot of decent name actors. Oh, Simon Pegg in series 1, I guess, to an extent.
The thing is, I gotta say, I do have a bit of a soft spot for the John Nathan Turner approach, because that kind of faded star from yesteryear stuff, the kind of people who would get referenced in Viz.
Yeah.
Right? It's catnip to me. I'm absolutely and what I love is when there's a stunt casting, or not stunt casting, but there's a guest of someone I had previously never heard of.
Yeah, yeah.
So Stubby K.
Stubby K, I remember we talked a lot about in Delta and the Bannerman.
Delta and the Bannerman, yeah. And just like that, famous American actor, comedian, vaudevillian, and singer. And by all accounts, absolutely, like, you know, that's his thing. You know, that's John Nathan Turner being, I would argue, deliciously self-indulgent. Hardly a big name in the UK, but very well, but kind of, in that kind of realm of people who, Stubby K,
Yeah.
within a certain milieu of people who care about show business, and I kind of like that. I've got a.
I suppose it's also quite sort of redundant. I mean, I've said before that, like, I think 80s Doctor Who feels very marooned from the rest of the 80s. And I think, even now, I've heard Russell T Davies say it before that, like, you look at Colin Baker's costume and you go, oh, wow, we're in the 80s. And actually, it's only if you take a very broad brush view of, like, the 80s being quite garish and bad taste. There's actually very little that happens design-wise, or even artistically, I think, in 80s Doctor Who, certainly up until the McCoy era, that kind of locates the show in the 1980s. And I think
really?
I
don't think that's entirely true. I don't like the design. I mean, I've talked before about the kind of pastel shade dreariness of much of the kind of Peter Davison and Colin Baker era. But I mean, Tegan's get up, right, would not exist in any other decade, right? The
Probably
kind of
not, but was anyone? I mean,
yellow
maybe
triangles
Tegan,
everywhere.
maybe
Every set seemed to have like beige walls and yellow triangles, as if it was a crafting show. With Judy Spires about to leap out and say, "Here's how you can make a fox cub out of ribbons," or something.
I don't know. I think, to be fair, though, you just made a slightly more persuasive, for me, connection to the 80s in sort of situating it like what was 80s entertainment at the time. Like, a lot of it was
Pebble
that
Mill.
sort of holdover of the long 70s. It's like, it's all of the stuff that Inside Number 9 is sending up in the sort of Bernie Clifton's dressing room the sort of, that kind of, the fact that the black and white minstrel show was still being made in the 1980s.
We'll mention that next week as well.
Oh, God. Anyway, look, to a point that I was going to make, which is that the one that got away, right, apparently for the aborted 1993 special, The Dark Dimension, which was going to be this epic, probably straight-to-video film that with all the Doctors that never happened. The villain was due to be played by Rick Mayall. Right. And that, to me, is the sort of, the opportunity. The idea of Rick Mayall playing a scenery-chewing Doctor Who villain would have, I don't know, I'd have got a kick out of that. Yeah. And he would have been in his pomp at that point as well. 1993, Rick Mayall. Yeah. Was that around the time of New Statesman? Yeah, Bottom as well. More Bottom, I'd think. But I'd like that's, and for me, Bottom is Imperial Rick Mayall. 100%. So I think that's a good shout. Yeah. Very good shout. In terms of people, I mean, I was thinking as well, like a bit later in the run. Obviously, we're talking about the Lodger today, but I was thinking about, for example, Frank Skinner turning up in Mummy on the Orient Express. And who is it? Is it in Kablam? Oh, Lee Mack. Lee Mack. Yeah. Well, this is also, there's a long list of comedians who are Doctor Who fans. To be clear, neither of those works as far as I'm concerned. But they, what I suppose my problem, generally speaking, is when they cast, and it's actually true of the Lodger as well. You cast a comedian, you know, as a bit of stunt casting or guest cast, and you want them to be funny, right? You've cast these people who are funny. You want them to be funny. Yeah. And then when they're not, or they're cast as kind of, janitors or shop workers, and you're meant to sort of just feel sympathy for them or whatever, it's a bit of a wasted opportunity. Well, you lose that suspension of disbelief, because what you're waiting for, come on, isn't he going to be funny? Yeah. You're not really listening to what they're saying. Isn't he going to tell a gag, So, yeah. Well, there you go. This has been a Round the Houses episode, hasn't it? We've covered appropriately. Appropriately enough. Well, there you go. Might not have an upstairs, but we went round that ground floor. Oh, something else about the Lodger. Sorry. Are you going to talk about the weirdness of that Victorian terrace house where one section of it doesn't have an upstairs because it's obviously been painted out in post-production? Well, yeah, there's that, when it kind of go, what? That, yeah, I mean, whatever. It looks so weird. It looks so strange. It's very odd. They've tried their best, but no. No, I can't get over how, like, the proto-TARDIS ship thing is such a great set. Yeah. Like,
And I remember at the time, actually, and I must have been reading internet stuff at the time, which is, I can't believe I was doing it. But people going, oh my God, this is going to be the big bad of the, these people trying to create TARDISes and all that sort of stuff. And this brilliant little set design with the proto TARDIS never features ever again.
Does it get used as? I mean, I don't
It
remember.
might get used as something.
I think it turns up as like the Silence have it as their ship later.
Oh, really?
I just want to put in a note there that I think that's. I mean, I really don't remember. I'm sure someone in the comments will correct us. Which is the perfect segue to do some housekeeping and implore our audience for some engagement on all of this. So, obviously, if you're on YouTube, leave a comment below.
Like and subscribe.
You can follow us on a multitude of social channels. The best places to get us are Instagram, @ExplainLaterPod. We'll occasionally check in on the Twitter, @ExplainLaterPod. Blue Sky, I'll explain later. Or a good old-fashioned email, hello@I'llExplainLater.com. Leave us a review. I'm sure we'll probably get a few more excoriating us for our woke politics, but there you go. We've nailed our colours to the mast now. You know what you're getting.
I have a nasty suspicion that we're going to get a load of 2- and 3-star reviews on Apple Podcasts after this one, but I feel that's very much in keeping with the Lodger. So in many ways, it's thematically coherent.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh God, good stuff. Well, thanks so much for watching and listening. We'll be back next week with more. Yes, sorry, I always forget that we do. So we're going to be looking at Spyfall.
Parts 1 and 2.
Parts 1 and 2.
Parts 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And 2. Both parts.
How's that for a value for money proposition?
I know, right? 2 for the price of 1.
Not even charging for this.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week. Have a good week.
Bye.